Well, folks, it was bound to happen. In the wake of the recent election that we all witnessed in Virginia, the school board meetings all over the country have all of a sudden fallen under a mysteriously large amount of scrutiny over whether or not the schools they represent are teaching critical race theory or a form of it by a different name to the kids at those schools. And the evidence that keeps popping up from place to place to place is overwhelming, and this is happening. And so, as often happens in this crazy country of ours, and as fate would almost certainly have had it eventually, one of those school board meetings finally ended up being the site of threats of violence from some douchebag former member of a militia group. Now, this guy came walking up to the podium and said, and I quote, he said, "I have over 1,000 soldiers ready to go. They're locked and loaded." After which he was summarily escorted out of the building by law officers who were present at the meeting, presumably just in case something exactly like this happened. And the icing on the cake, well, it happened right here in the Fort Worth area. See, there's living proof that these parents wanting their children not to learn about CRT are crazy, unhinged, demented, evil bastards, right? Except for one tiny little problem. The guy in question, Malikk Austin, was a parent who wants his children to be taught CRT. He was part of the Brotherhood. That's what it's called, the Brotherhood, a black militia group. And the violence he was threatening was aimed at, you guessed it, parents who've been fighting against CRT being taught to their children. Now, in the interest of fairness, Austin did later claim that saying he and his allies were, quote, locked and loaded referred merely to them being prepared to fight this thing verbally. And hey, maybe that's exactly the truth. The past couple of years of behavioral evidence on the part of the social justice warrior class would tend to suggest otherwise, but maybe he just spoke really, really, really poorly. It's a possibility that wouldn't even be considered if the shoe was on the other foot and this had come from an anti-CRT parent. But why stoop to the same level that they're willing to, in our view, of the outer boundaries of civil discourse? Now, that being said, let's assume for a moment, and I think this is a safe assumption, that the man meant what he said. It's a safe assumption precisely because the misguided understanding of the pursuit of so-called racial justice has ended up in violence, murder, burning, looting, and just about every other form of demented tomfoolery available on the menu from Kenosha to Portland and back. So what are we going to do if this turns from not a thing into a thing? Well, let me start by saying that Texas is the wrong place to be walking into a group of adult mama and papa bears and threatening violence. These folks hit the ammo box harder than Jeffrey Toobin hits the end of a Zoom call button these days, and they care about their kids to the exclusion of consideration about whether or not something looks good in the public eye. Now, the simple and unfortunate truth, folks, is this, that this issue over schools and critical race theory probably is going to escalate to violence at some point soon. Issues like these, in which the polarization of American thought reaches a boiling point, rarely end up with nobody getting hurt. We see it over and over again, and you don't want that. But I do think you should be mentally prepared for the possibility of it. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I've got to repeat this. Get your kids out of public schools. Find a way. And while you're finding a way, make sure you're talking to them daily. Ask questions. Don't strap them into some kind of chair and shine a light in their faces and shoot them up with sodium pentothal unless you absolutely have to. But do your due diligence as a parent and make sure you know what they're being taught.